Hi everyone, welcome to DPS 2022. My name is Madhu. I work as a PM in SQL security team. And for today's session, I'll have my colleague Anton, who would be joining from Microsoft Israel. He's the principal PM manager. Okay, so today's topic is going to be the new improvement that we have done in SQL data discovery space, and how does that integrate with Azure, Microsoft Purview and Power BI, and then how does the entire stuff integrate with Office application. So this new improvement facilitates you to achieve an end-to-end data protection solution or data protection starting from the source to the point of consumption. Today's agenda is going to be talking about the digital transformation which is happening these days, and what are the challenges that we need to face, and how do we address those challenges of digital transformation and massive data which is getting created out of it. Next thing would be we will be seeing what is the solution that Microsoft offers to address those challenges. And then we will be talking about the data discovery and classification capability that we have in Azure Synapse and SQL. We'll be seeing the new improvement I just mentioned a while ago, which is integrating with my Microsoft Information Protection Policy, and which facilitates the end-to-end protection throughout the journey of the data. We'll be seeing a demo on how to classify data using Azure Portal or SSMS. And then Anton would be talking about the built-in information protection policy in Power BI and downstream inheritance of protection labels from source to Power BI reports. And then when you export that report or data to any other Microsoft application, for an example, Excel, how does those protection labels flow down to Office application automatically? And there'll be a end-to-end demo towards the end of the session to see how all these different pieces comes together to provide the capability that we are talking about. Okay, so before we start the session, please note that this is a recorded session, and myself and Anton would be present during the live session to answer any questions or collect your feedback for the new improvement, and definitely the entire end-to-end protection solution that we are talking about. And if there are any other new ideas and suggestions that you would like to share, please feel free to do so during the live session. Okay, so the first thing is the massive digital transformation which is happening in today's world, and it is not limited to a specific region or company. It's happening all over the globe. And because of which there is a massive and huge amount of data getting created every day. It's getting stored and it is getting shared everywhere. It's no more specific to one country or one state or region. It's across the globe. So when it comes to your on-prem environment, let's say you are sharing data across different teams within a company. When it comes to Azure, or you're talking about any third-party cloud services, you are sharing data beyond your boundaries as well. So when such a huge amount of data getting created and it's getting shared with multiple parties, different parties coming from different part of the world, how do you ensure that you handle that critical or sensitive data accurately as per the regulations and compliances that your company has and you need to meet? It's just not company, even your the region or country might have its own regulation. So it's just not the data which is exploding. There are number of regulations and compliances which are coming very frequently, and you need to keep up to those regulations, and not complying with those regulations can cost you a lot of fine or withdrawal of licenses, losing the trust with customers and regulators. Based on some recent research, what we have seen is more than 80% of corporate data is dark. So when I say dark, that means it's not classified. You don't know whether it's a PI data, it's a financial data. It has no tag associated with it. So it's treated the same way the other data that you have in your org. So when it is not classified, you cannot know what is the sensitivity level of that data. So when you don't know the sensitivity of the data, you cannot have right set of access control policies, or you cannot have the right set of control when the data travels from one team to other team or to another region. So these are the common questions which are raised by people. Do you even know where your business critical and sensitive data resides? Because before even you handle it accurately, you should know where does that live. And once you know where does that reside, then you can put in other measures like you can have encryption strategies, you can have access control strategies on who can access that data and who cannot. And there are companies who are using different kind of data governance solutions which has its own set of policies and standards. Now integrating different standards across different applications that you have in your company might be tough. So what we are looking for is a single comprehensive solution, and that's what Microsoft offers today in terms of Microsoft Purview. So Microsoft Purview is a single comprehensive solution which helps you govern your data, protect your data, and manage the entire data estate. So how does that do it, or how does it help you doing it? First of all, it can discover the data sources, the variety of data sources that you have. So once you discover the entire data estate, then it becomes easy to govern that data. So Microsoft Purview has built-in set of policies to scan your data sources and classify the data as sensitive or not sensitive. So once you classify your data as sensitive, you can put in other measures like data access control policies, or you can put in encryption policies across your data estate when there is sensitive data and you know what's the location of that sensitive data. You can define rules, how does that sensitive data can flow from one location to other location. So once you take care of knowing where the sensitive data resides, what is the lineage, how does that data travel, and you have a bird's eye view of the entire data estate. You classify the sensitive data, you put in access control policies, then you are improving the risk and compliance posture. It's becoming easy to manage those regulations that you need to comply with. And one more thing to note here, Microsoft Purview supports different kind of data sources. Even it supports third-party cloud services. And when I say data sources, it's not limited to file system. It supports hybrid kind of data. It supports Azure Synapse, SQL, and other databases and data sources from third-party cloud providers as well. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so in the context of today's session, we will be talking about one new improvement which we actually GA'd in April of this year, and that's Microsoft Information Protection Policy capability, which is available in SQL data classification feature. You can leverage this policy in SSMS or in Azure portal. And how do we bring the power of all these three: Microsoft Purview governance, Azure Synapse SQL or SQL Server, and Power BI, by integrating the information protection policy across these three or different applications that Microsoft provide to give you an end-to-end data protection solution throughout the journey of the data. So starting from the source to the point of consumption, you can keep your data protected with by adding the sensitivity tags to those sensitive data. So what are the benefits? People who have already used Microsoft 365 services and Microsoft 365 Compliance Center must be knowing that you can create sensitivity labels and policies in the Compliance Center, and then you can leverage those labels, sensitivity labels that you define in the Compliance Center. When you create new documents or you send out emails, you can classify those emails or docs with certain tags, and then you can have policies who can view it and not view it based on the sensitivity tags. So because of the integration with Microsoft Information Protection Policy, you can have in SQL, you can have now unified policies across the data estate. It's just not a Microsoft 365 applications. You can use the same labels to classify data inside Azure Synapse database or Azure SQL DB or even SQL Server on-prem environment. And Power BI also has these built-in information protection policy. It understands the sensitivity label and can automatically classify the reports with the sensitivity tag, which is defined at the source. So you don't need to manually classify the report. It can automatically fetch the tags from the source, and that's we call it as downstream inheritance in Power BI. So it's just not Power BI report. When you export this data to another Microsoft application like Excel, the same sensitivity label can flow down to the reports. So that gives you an end-to-end data protection throughout the journey that I was talking a couple of times from the beginning of the session. So that reduces the governance complexity, and the onboarding of new applications become a lot easier across your organization. So before we look at the end-to-end scenario, let's talk about the native data discovery and classification capability that we have in Azure Synapse and SQL. So what are the major things that it provides today, the native data discovery and classification? The very first one is auto data discovery and recommendation. Second is classification of sensitive data. And third is you can generate report and export. So what is auto discovery and recommendation? So SQL has the inbuilt capability of scanning the database, and based on the built-in policies, it can provide you recommendations based on what it has found. Like, let's say it found in a database, it found 50 columns. Based on the inbuilt policies, that should be classified with certain sensitivity tags. So automatic data discovery will scan through the database and give you those list of recommendations. So you can review those recommendations and accept it or apply it. If you find it accurate, or if you want to change, you definitely can go ahead and make the changes and then save it. Apart from the automatic data discovery and recommendation, you have the privilege or capability of manually classifying the data based on the organization rules that you might have in place. So once you classify the data, you can generate a report, you can export that data and share it with concerned team. So when we say classification of sensitive data, that means you want to add certain attributes to that data or column. So there are two different kind of attributes that SQL supports today. One is sensitivity label, the other one is information type. Sensitivity label examples are like you want to call the data as confidential or highly confidential, or it's a generic data which can be shared with everyone. So there are a couple of these inbuilt sensitivity labels that SQL provides. Apart from that, you can have information type, which is an extra attribute. Apart from sensitivity label, you want to label the data or tag the data saying that this is financial data, or this is PI data, or this is contact info. So those kind of default information types are available in SQL. So let's move on to the next slide. These are the different information protection policies that SQL data classification supports today. We already had SQL information protection policy. The feature that we GA'd recently in April is Microsoft Information Protection Policy integration. So I was talking about the default sensitivity labels that information types that SQL provides by default, right? So that comes from the SQL information protection policy that is inbuilt. So either you can use Azure portal to export this policy, as you can see in this screenshot. You can export it, you can customize as per your need and import it. You can do the same in SSMS as well. You can export and customize it, and you can set that custom policy, and based on the custom policy, you can classify the data. Or you can use the default set of policies that SQL offers today. Microsoft Information Protection Policy is new, and in you can see the this option in Azure portal and as well as in SSMS. So this integrates with Microsoft Purview or Microsoft 365, and to leverage this policy or the labels which are defined as part of this policy, the admin must have created those sensitivity labels in Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, which has been renamed or rebranded as Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. So once you have those labels defined there and it has been published to certain users and groups, you can leverage those labels to classify the data in Azure Synapse or SQL. Okay, so I have a demo which is already recorded and it's part of the slide. You can listen to that. Right now, I'll go to the portal and manually show you how do you classify the sensitive data in Azure Synapse. Okay. So right now I'm in the Azure portal and you can see I'm connected to the Azure Synapse DB. So let's move on to the security section where you can see data discovery and classification blade. So once the data discovery classification blade gets loaded, you can see there are two sections, overview and classification. So overview shows you the already classified columns. It's list of already classified columns. There is a graphical presentation of this, and then there is a list of tables and columns in the list, which shows that these are already classified. The other thing you could see here is the recommendation part that I was talking about. So it was able to scan the database automatically, and it found that there are 5 more columns which needs to be classified. And you can review this list and see if it is appropriate and accept the recommendations. Right now, I'll go to the just a moment. Let me. Yeah. So let me show you how to add classification. But before that, let's go back to the overview section and configure page. You can see the two policies that I was talking about, SQL Information Protection Policy and then Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So Microsoft Information Protection Policy is new, which was available starting from April of this year. By default, portal selects the SQL information protection policy. So let me go ahead and classify the data using the default policy. Sorry. Okay, so go to the classification page and then go to add classification. So either you can accept the recommendation or you can just go to the add classification tab, select the schema, and then any table. This is just for demo purpose. Okay, so let me select, all right, just a moment. I can select anything, but let's say company name. Information type, I can say probably contact info. Sensitivity label, I want to call it confidential. Add classification and save it. Yeah, it is saved now. And you can see, if I go to the overview section, so this is 12 classified columns. So let me move back to the overview section, go to configure page, and select Microsoft Information Protection Policy, which is new. And to select this policy, the user who is connected to the portal should have the right administrative rights um, for this tenant, and the steps are documented in the Microsoft Docs. If the labels are not defined, you can directly click on the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, and this is the Compliance Center where I have already created the sensitivity labels and published to the required users. Okay, so let's save the change. Okay, done. It takes some time to take effect. You can see now that it shows it's using Microsoft Information Protection Policy. Let's go to the classification tab and let's see if the change has taken effect. So if I click on the sensitivity label, you can see these labels are getting fetched from Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, where I had already defined these labels. So these are not the built-in or the default setup policies, sorry, the labels that SQL offers. Let's go to add classification, and let's classify one column using the new policy. So I can select the schema, and let's go to the same table. Any column I can select. Let's say, okay, let's move down. Okay, company ID. Information type is always not applicable when you are in this Microsoft Information Protection Policy mode. Sensitivity level, you can select, let's say, confidential all employees. Add classification, that becomes 13 classified columns, and save it. Okay, and you can see in the overview section those 13 classified columns and the list of columns which have been classified. So that completes the demo on how to classify data using Azure portal in Azure Synapse. The same steps are applicable to Azure DB and MI. So let me move on to the on-prem environment and SSMS to classify the data. Okay, so I'm connected to the local instance, and this is my user database where I want to classify the sensitive data. So I go to task, then data discovery and classification. You can see that there are multiple options here, and this is reset information protection policy to default. Will set the policy to SQL information protection policy, and set Microsoft information protection policy will set the policy to the new policy that I talked about. So let's first select the default policy and classify the data manually. Go to tasks and classify data. So you can see that SQL was able to found 14 columns which needs to be which needs to be classified. So I can click on this link and review this list. If that is appropriate, I can go ahead and save it. Yeah. Or what I can do is I can go to a specific schema and select any of the table, let's say customers, and click on load columns. So load columns will display all the classified columns in that table. So you can see I have 11 classified columns. And if I go to view reports, it will display the classified columns for the entire database, just not for one table. This is for entire database. And if you go down in the list of tables and columns, you can see customers, order, and employees. I have these three tables and classified columns which belong to those tables. Let's close this. So customers, I already have these many columns which are classified. So let's choose employees table, click on load columns. I have only one classified column. So let's click on add classification and select, let's say, okay, employee ID or country. So let's say country, and information type, I can say, okay, contact info and confidential. So you can see there was a automatic mapping between contact info and this sensitivity label confidential, but I can change it as per my need. Click on add and I can save it. Do you see this warning icon here? This is because this column was earlier classified using Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So if you see this warning icon, this is not a problem. It's just an indication that a different information protection policy was used to classify this particular column. So now let's move on to another demo, just to see how do you classify data using Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So I close the tab and then I come back to data discovery and classification. I want to set Microsoft Information Protection Policy. I clicked on that. Now you need to sign in and give the right credential here, which can access those labels from Microsoft 365. Okay, so my authentication is successful. I close this, right click, go to task, data discovery and classification. You can see now that I have Microsoft Information Protection Policy, which is active. Now I can go back and go ahead and do the same set of steps I can follow. Let's choose employees, or you can say orders and load columns. Okay, I have one column which has been classified already, and this warning icon is because it was classified using the the SQL information protection policy earlier. So let me click on add classification and then go to any of the column that I want to classify. Let's say ship country, and information type is always NA when you are in this Microsoft Information Protection Policy mode. I select the sensitivity label as confidential all employees, click on add and save it. So now I have two classified columns. If I want, I can definitely go ahead and change this column sensitivity label using Microsoft Information Protection Policy and save it. So that completes the demo on how to classify data in SQL Server using SSMS. So let's move on to the slide deck. Okay, so these are some useful links. You can go through these documents to find out more about data discovery and classification in Azure Synapse, SQL, and the required set of administrative rights that you need tenant-wide in the Microsoft Defender page. Thank you for watching. So my colleague Anton would be talking about the capability which is available in Power BI, the downstream inheritance, and how does the and also give you a demo on the end-to-end protection of data throughout its journey, starting from Azure Synapse to Power BI to the Office applications. Thank you again.
Thank you, Madhu. My name is Anton Fritz. I'm a Principal PM Manager on Power BI team. Let me share with you how information protection can help you protect sensitive data in Power BI. So Power BI is a rich analytics platform suitable for every organization. It has over 200 connectors to different data source types. And it enables everybody in your organization to build rich, beautiful, interactive visualizations, leverage AI built into Power BI platform to generate smart insights. And it's fully secured and compliant, enabling you to host any type of sensitive data that your organization has. Power BI also enabling you to consume this data and share it in your organization via web, on-premises, or even built into your websites and SharePoint sites and team sites. Power BI also has the best in the world BI application available on iOS and Android to consume the data when you travel. Power BI is optimized for big data, and it can effectively connect your decision makers with the rich big data you have in your data warehouse by offering a rich semantic layer, high performance for big data analytics, and a rich set of interactive reports and dashboard capabilities that can be leveraged to visualize your data. Similar to what Madhu showed you for Synapse and SQL, Power BI also integrated with the Microsoft Purview Information Protection, enabling data owners in the organization to apply sensitivity labels on sensitive content in Power BI, including Power BI reports, dashboards, PBX files in Power BI Desktop, and data marts. Another great value that we provide in Power BI, besides showing the consumers the sensitivity level of the data they consume in Power BI, is protected when the data is exported outside of Power BI to Excel, PowerPoint, Word, PBX, and PDF file formats, enabling a full secure data consumption. The fact that we are part of Microsoft and integrated with information protection enables us provide you with unique end-to-end information protection capability as your data travels from Azure through Power BI and to Office. Power BI can automatically identify the sensitivity level on data sources, which are Excel, Synapse Analytics, and Azure SQL database, and on-prem SQL servers. And once this sensitivity level is identified, Power BI automatically applies it on the data in Power BI, including downstream reports and dashboards connected to this data in Power BI. Let me show you a quick demo of how this works. Sensitivity labels that can be defined by information protection admins in Microsoft Purview Information Protection and used in Office, Power BI, and Microsoft Purview Governance are now can be applied on sensitive data in Synapse. Here I can see how I can apply the same sensitivity labels I can use in Office on sensitive data in Synapse. Once the sensitivity level is applied, every time that Power BI will fetch this data, Power BI will also know the sensitivity level of this data, and if necessary, automatically apply the sensitivity level on Power BI dataset and all downstream reports. This way, every time that end user consumes Power BI reports with data coming from Synapse, they will automatically see the sensitivity level on the report header and know how to treat the sensitive data. When these users also export the data to Office, which is very common use case, the sensitivity level and protection automatically applied on Office files. This way, we ensure that the data is protected end-to-end, starting from Synapse through Power BI and to Office. Power BI also helps the admins to monitor the classification status of their Power BI tenant with built-in protection metrics report that enables admins to track the sensitivity status of their tenant. To enable information protection in Power BI, once it's enabled in Microsoft Purview Compliance Center, Power BI admin can enable information protection in Power BI admin portal. It can be enabled for the entire organization or gradually to support your information protection rollout strategy. Power BI has quite a lot of capabilities supported as part of integration with information protection and Microsoft Purview in general. You can check them out online or in other sessions that we have in this conference. To summarize the few of the most important ones: information protection Power BI service and in Power BI desktop, admin APIs to bulk apply sensitivity labels on all the content in your Power BI tenant, mandatory and default label policies ensuring that the new content created in Power BI applied with sensitivity labels, and also downstream inheritance that we saw in the demo before. And we also have a great integration with the Purview data map, enabling you to discover sensitive information in Power BI using Microsoft Purview. Other new capabilities that we introduced are in the area of data loss prevention policies, which is another Microsoft Purview solution to help you be compliant and safeguard your sensitive data. Thank you very much.
To the Q&A slide, and we have tried compiling a list of questions which are pretty common, and often these are the questions which are raised when it comes to how do you classify data using this new Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So the very first question is, how do you switch from SQL Information Protection Policy to Microsoft Information Protection Policy when you are classifying data in SQL using the native data classification feature? Earlier, we used to call it just information protection policy within SQL, but when we introduced Microsoft Information Protection Policy, we kind of rebranded or renamed the existing information protection policy as SQL Information Protection Policy. Now, it is pretty straightforward or simple when you are using Azure Portal or SSMS to classify the data which are stored in SQL. So there are very simple options. You can switch or toggle between these options. So let me quickly go to the portal and show you the policy options that we have in the portal. You can see that I've connected to one of the SQL database, and this is a dummy account that I'm using here to connect to this tenant. I am already on the data discovery and classification blade, and the page has been loaded. So if I go to the configure section or configure tab, yeah, so the page is loaded. You can see that there are two options here. SQL Information Protection Policy and Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So you can easily switch between this policy based on your requirement and click on Save so that the change will take effect. So let me quickly go to the SSMS and show the same options that is available now. So let me discard this change and go to SSMS. Yeah. So I'm connected to one of the local instance, and this is the user database. If I click on the user database, go to task, data discovery and classification, then there is this new option, set Microsoft Information Protection Policy. I click on that. So that brings up this pop-up window, which allows you to sign in or authenticate to Microsoft 365, which has been rebranded Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, or it has been rebranded as Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. So when you click on sign in, this gives you option to select the appropriate user, and the authentication happens in the backend. So if the tenant has Microsoft 365 subscription and the sensitivity labels or the MIP labels have been published to the user, then you can authenticate using that user and fetch whatever labels have been published to that specific user and start classifying your data. Now let's move on to the second question that I had on the slide. So many a time you will see that the Microsoft Information Protection Policy options in the portal is grayed out. That means it's not active and you cannot switch between SQL and Microsoft Information Protection Policy. So to show you that scenario, let me again move on to the portal. Here I have connected to one of the tenant where I do not have the required set of permission. So when let me close this, when I come to the configure tab, you can see that these options are grayed out, and on the top you have a short message that you do not have necessary permission to make this change. And this is also documented in MSDN what kind of permissions are required. But let me also show you that to make it easy. Um, so let's go to this scenario where I had the permission to change the policy. Let's search for yeah, management groups. I think it was already there. So the difference that I have between both the environment is in this, the working scenario or working environment, I have the security admin permission at the tenant root group level. So if I click on this, the tenant root group, and go to the access control tab, and look at what kind of role or assignments I have for this particular tenant, you can see that I have security admin rights, and that makes the difference. And so the user or the person who has the security admin permission at the tenant root level will be able to switch between the policy and not any other user. So with this, I will hand over to Anton, who is going to cover the next two questions from Power BI side. Over to you, Anton.
Thank you, Madhu. Uh, the first question that I would like to cover is why is the Power BI report not classified even if the underlying data columns are already classified in SQL? And this is a very common question that we get from customers that try to test the inheritance features offline before deploying them, and sometimes things don't work for them as expected. So, what I'm going to list now is like a few of the setup things or configurations that we recommend you to validate before you start testing this, just to make sure that everything configured properly for the labels to flow from SQL to Power BI. So first of all, is information protection should be enabled in Power BI admin portal. Inheritance from data source also should be enabled. And let me share my screen for a moment just to show you how it works. So here I'm now in Power BI admin portal. And in Power BI admin portal, we have an information protection sections. So from Power BI side, you need to ensure that first of all, you allow users to apply sensitivity labels on content. And specifically for the user that owns the data sets and report you want the sensitivity label to be applied on. The common practice in production tenants is to enable the information protection for the entire tenant. So this should not be an issue, but this is a first prerequisite. The second prerequisite is to enable apply sensitivity labels from data sources. This setting also can be enabled for entire organization or for specific security group. So in order for the end-to-end to work, once again, the user that owns the content in Power BI has to have this setting enabled for them. And once again, most of the customers just enable them for entire organization, and then it should work. So this is from Power BI settings perspective. The second thing that sometimes happening is that we hear customers using test environments to do this validation. So it's especially for enterprise customers that don't want to test new features on production environment, so they create test environments. And not always the test environments that they used for SQL are the same that they use for Power BI from tenant perspective. So the second thing you need to ensure that the information protection tenant that you're using is the same also for the labels that you apply in SQL and for the labels you apply in Power BI. Sometimes this is not the case, and this can be confusing. And the last reason that if all of the settings are okay, you need to ensure the dataset or the report are not applied with sensitivity label. Because if a user applies manual sensitivity label manually on a dataset on or report, Power BI will not override manually applied label coming from a data source. It will update only labels that was applied automatically by data source inheritance. And if this label is less restrictive than the label coming from the SQL. So for example, if in SQL the label we are getting is confidential and the dataset already has highly confidential label, the inheritance feature won't override it. So, and the last question is, how does Power BI apply sensitivity label on the report when there are multiple sensitivity labels applied to the underlying columns in table? So here we are applying a logic that decides which is the most restrictive one. So for example, if from one data source that have multiple columns, or if there are several data sources with multiple columns, multiple files, and different labels, Power BI will aggregate all the sensitivity labels coming from the data source, and according to the label order in the compliance center, it will apply the most restrictive sensitivity label on Power BI content. And just to see how it actually looks, so here in Microsoft Purview Information Protection section, in label definition, the security admin can define what is the label order. This is the order that Power BI will take into account when applying the sensitivity label coming from the data source. So, for example, if we have a public sensitivity label, general sensitivity label, and one of the confidential sensitivity labels, we will take the most restrictive confidential sensitivity label because it has a higher order and more restrictive.